Welcome back to part 3 of 2. Yes, this was only supposed to be a 2-part series on the MiniDisc and our MDS-501 player, but it turned into 3 parts, mainly because I found a bunch of old information about the MDS-501 that I wanted to go over, and we went into a big history lesson on the unit itself and didn't actually get to the repairing. But this time, we are gonna go and do the repair and fix a bunch of stuff that we find wrong with this unit. So check it out. So the particular machine we're going to be looking at today is called the MDS-501, and this was a full-sized mini disc deck for your home. This was meant to go on top of your stereo receiver, what have you, in your stack of hi-fi equipment or whatever you want to call it. Apparently this was the very first one that Sony made, the first full-size one. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So now we're going to take a look at the one that I have and figure out what's going on with it. So the first thing that we see when we power the unit on is it has a front panel reading that says TOC reading, and apparently TOC means table of contents. And I guess when you put a mini disc in there, the first thing it does is it reads the table of contents so it can see how many tracks are on there and where the tracks are placed on the disc, so that when you do the track back and forth thing, the laser reader knows exactly where to go on the disc to find all of those tracks. So that's what it is doing, but it just sits there and it can't seem to do what it's supposed to be doing. There's also, if you listen closely, you can hear kind of a motor turning kind of sound, which is probably not good. So not sure what's going on, but the fact that it's trying to read a table of contents seems to indicate that there might be something in there that it's trying to read. So if you tried ejecting to see if it could pop out whatever's in there, but that doesn't seem to work. None of the controls on the front really seem to do anything. So the next step here is to kind of figure out what to do. I had a look into, I opened the front loading door where the mini disc goes in and had a peek inside. It doesn't really show up very well on camera. I couldn't quite get the angle right to see it in there, but there is a mini disc stuck inside there. So that seems to be problem number 1.
It appears to be jammed.
So the first thing that what I'm going to try to do is open this up and try to get that out of there. Maybe that whirring motor sound that we're hearing is because the loading and unloading mechanism is stuck or off of a rail, or there's a gear loose, or who knows what it could be. But maybe if we're lucky, we can get that unjammed, and then we can be back in business. So step 1, we're gonna take the cover off of this thing and see what's going on inside. Luckily, this is a high-end component, which means that they are meant to be opened up and repaired if needed. A lot of the lower-end electronics that you find, the insides, well, they're hard to get open, for one, because they're not meant to be open. And then once you're inside, all the connectors and wires and things are soldered in place, so they're not meant to be disconnected in any way. With something like this, all of those connections are actually meant to be unplugged and replugged back in, so that you can actually get things out to work on them, which is really nice. So once the cover is off here, you can see there's not a ton of components in here, which is nice. There's like a main board and a few other things on here. Power supply, obviously. So you can see the thing we're going to be looking at is the drive assembly. And it's mounted on 4 screws which have springs under them, so it's the shock absorption kind of thing, and the whole drive assembly actually feels like it's floating there. If you touch it, it's got this springiness to it, which is kind of interesting. I've never seen that on any other thing, but this is all part of the anti-skip functionality of the MiniDisc. So now, one of the other things that we need to look at here or notice is that the disc itself is not spinning, and it should be spinning just like a CD spins when it's being read. So does the MiniDisc. You can hear the motor whirring sound, which is good because it means the motor is likely spinning, but bad because the connection between the motor itself and the mechanism that spins the disc is obviously not working. That may be due to a belt or something like that. I don't see any belts right here, so we're gonna have to investigate further. But first thing is we're gonna pop the disc out, and it looks like after some inspection that you can just push the whole drive tray thing out, so that's nice that it wasn't locked in any way. So here we have our disc. Looks to be in fine condition. Just to test, I'm gonna try to put it back in and see what happens. I don't have a lot of high expectations that anything is gonna magically fix itself now that I've seen that the disc does not spin. I was hoping it might have been just jammed and it could be unjammed, but I think this is going to be a bigger problem than we thought. So, as expected, trying to put the disc back in, the mechanism does not want to receive the disc. So this also tells us that whatever connection pulls the drive tray back in to pull the disc in is also not working. I don't know if that's a separate connection from the spinning part of it, or if it's a separate thing. So maybe there's 2 different issues here, the drive tray input and output kind of mechanism and the spinning mechanism, or it could all be connected to the same part. We're not sure. So again, I don't see any belts here, so that means that we need to find if there is a belt, and that means looks like we're gonna have to take this whole assembly out and see if we can look underneath it to find out what's there.
Phony, below the belt journalism, that's what it is.
Not below the belt, right in the gut, Mr. Boot.
So we've got the drive assembly undone here. It was the 4 mounting screws, the spring-loaded mounting screws had to come out. There's a connector in the back for power or something, not sure. I would guess it's power. That needs to come out. There's also these 2 ribbon cables on the side here, and those are probably the data that transfers from the main board or the processor or what have you and communicates with the drive assembly. So once those are all undone, the whole thing comes out as one unit. Once the unit is out, we can look around, and sure enough, there appears to be a belt, or at least where there should be a belt, down on the bottom here. and further inspection shows that the belt is indeed snapped, but even worse, this belt has turned to complete tar, which is unfortunately something that happens after a while to these types of drive belts. They a lot of times they'll just break, but then I don't know what causes this exactly, but it's probably environmental conditions like heat and things like that. But after a while, these drive belts the rubber starts to break down and disintegrate, and that causes it to turn into this pasty, sticky, black tar kind of substance, which is really gross and really messy and gets everywhere, and it's really hard to clean. So next step here is replace the belt. Well, first part of that step is you got to clean off all this tar gunk, and that's going to take a little bit of time and effort here in the form of some alcohol. I've got some 91%, which is, I mean, the higher percentage alcohol that you can find, the better. This was the best one I could get a hold of at the moment. Should be fine for our use. So I'm going to put some of that on some cotton swabs and see if I can get off as much of this gunk as I can. And it takes a while, and I've used several cotton swabs at this point and everything else, and the problem with these the spools or what have you that the drive belt goes into, it seems to have a very narrow track in it that all this gunk has gotten way down into. So it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get every little bit of this tar stuff out of here without really taking everything apart, which I don't really want to do. So I'm going to get as much of it as I can. It's not going to be perfect, but it should be good enough to where we can get this thing working again. So now that we've got this thing relatively clean, we should be able to get a belt back onto it. So now I'm gonna try my trusty bag of random belts. So this is something that's pretty easy to come by. I think I've got these off of eBay. There's lots of listings for these things, and basically it's just a big bag of random assortment of various belts of all kinds of different sizes in here, and it's just a grab bag full of stuff. It's really cheap, and there's a whole bunch of different belts in here. These belts aren't the highest quality belts you can find, you know, but you kind of get what you pay for $3, but it's usually good enough for what we're gonna need here. All we need is something that's gonna have enough tension to spin this drive motor. Some higher precision applications, like maybe a tape drive belt or something, might be not so good to use one of these type of belts, because the speed of the tape, how fast it turns, is kind of dependent on how it actually sounds. In the case of this, it just needs to spin at a certain RPM, so it doesn't need to be as precise. So this should be just fine for what we're gonna do. I've seen people use rubber bands for this kind of thing before, and it's worked out okay. So I think we'll be fine. We just gotta pick out a couple of good candidates here from our bag and see if we can find some that look like they might fit. So I'm gonna go with one of these. We're gonna try this and get it on there. Again, takes a little bit of acrobatics with the tweezers to try to get it around the spindles, but not too bad. And then we'll get it on there, and then it's a matter of getting all this back together and connected up again. So a couple of pro tips that I discovered the hard way as I was doing this is pro tip number one: watch those springs that are on the drive assembly, because you kind of just have to hold them there in place as you're getting the drive assembly back into where it goes. But those springs like to fall off, and then you have to play Where's Waldo underneath the drive assembly there. It's not fun. Usually you just have to take out the whole thing and start over again. So be very careful with those. Pro tip number two is when you take the drive assembly out, unhook the ribbon cable from the main board and not from underneath the drive itself. Or if you do unhook it from the drive itself, make sure you plug those ribbon cables back in before you put the drive in its place, because once it's in place you won't be able to access the ports where those ribbons go into underneath the drive. So it's much easier to get those in before you lower the drive assembly back into its place, and then you can plug the other end of the ribbon into the main board once you have it in place. So the other thing that I ended up finding out is once we got this all back together, powered it on, and success. It works and it plays a disc, it turns the drive, everything is fine. Unfortunately, I found that when I was turning the knob for the track select, it was a bit stuttery, and sometimes it would just advance one by one. It has the knob kind of clicks as you turn it, so you're supposed to just change one track per click, but I noticed even if I was very carefully turning it, sometimes it would just jump ahead 3 or 4 tracks with one skip, and sometimes it would go backwards, so it had a very erratic behavior. So that's a problem.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
I thought about just leaving it and living with it because I do have a remote for it, and changing tracks with the remote is fine. But it was kind of eating at me. I had to kind of sit there and look at this thing for quite a while to decide if I really wanted to take apart the front panel and get at that knob assembly. I had a feeling if I could just get some contact cleaner in there and work it in there, it should solve the problem. But I've heard stories about people trying to do that without getting at the appropriate mechanism precisely and ruining some other electronics that are in there, so I didn't want to risk doing that. So I was faced with the choice of, do I really take this whole thing out and potentially break it even more, or should I just leave it as is? Eventually I decided I just wouldn't be happy with it until I at least attempted to fix the knob. So that's what I did. It was several more screws to get the front circuit board or whatever it's called out of there. Had to be very careful because it looks to be a very delicate piece of the machine, and a lot of the cables I wasn't able to get at the parts where they unplug, so it kind of had to stay half plugged in the whole time, which was also made it more difficult. So luckily I was able to get some of the contact cleaner in there and work the knob back and forth a little bit, and then hope for the best. Another quick side note is how I got this machine was a Craigslist ad. It was about $20 and it was in a very rich city in the area where I live, and I went out there, and I went to a gigantic mansion. I pulled up and it looked like the couple that lived there were just moving in, or they hadn't quite finished moving in, or what have you, because the home theater room that I went into was pretty much empty, and they had been tearing out all of the stereo and equipment and things that were in this magnificent just handcrafted wood kind of cabinetry that was around the screen area, and it looked like what had been there was big racks, like equipment racks, AV racks, which you can all this stuff was mounted into, and they had some really high-end equipment there that was part of this, and it sounded like it was a pretty cool home theater system at one point. And apparently the previous owner of the house had just left all this equipment behind, and it's crazy to think that someone would just go and leave all their AV gear behind, but whatever. So back together, powered it on, tested the knob, and it seems to be much better. I'm not gonna say it's 100% better, but I'm gonna say it's around 98% better. There's still a little bit of stutter, but I think it's fine, and I'm not gonna take that thing apart again. So 98%, good enough.
Supreme victory! It works! It works!
So there you have it. It works. Amazing. I wasn't sure if it would or not. Honestly, before I got into this, I did not know very much about the MiniDisc as a format, so I learned quite a bit about that in the process of making this video. Also never looked inside of a MiniDisc player, so wasn't sure what to expect there. So learned a lot about fixing these and just in general. Hope you did too. We got this for $20 plus some extra stuff that came with it. pretty good deal, even if it was a non-working machine. Now that it works, according to eBay, last sold prices, it's worth between $130 and $175. So that's pretty good. Not that I'm going to sell it. I'm going to keep this for my personal collection, but that's what we do here. Retro Toilet. You flush it, we fix it. Turn your retro crap into retro gold. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.
All right, you know what? This was dumb. Dump it. Trash it. This was garbage.